Hi, Sam. My name is Corey. I live in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. My question for you is more of a vote than a question. I'd really love to hear you discuss the Eric Topol podcast with Bret Weinstein on a future podcast. I know that you have considered that and kind of ruled it out at this point, but I'd love for you to reconsider. My sense is that there is a lot more common ground to land on than disagreement. And each of you,
Oh
I think, could
no.
actually learn from the other about their own sense of reality surrounding the COVID issues. I
Uh-oh.
think we're all a bit confused, and we would all learn from the two of you learning from each other. Thank you.
Hey, Corey. Thanks for the question. Yeah, this is a hard one for me, actually. I get that it seems crazy not to just flip on the microphone and talk to the guy, or talk to him and Heather, who's also been his partner in crime. It's hard to put this in a way that doesn't sound like a personal attack, but the reason why I don't want to do a podcast with Bret and Heather is the same as why I wouldn't do a podcast with a 9/11 truth conspiracy theorist or Alex Jones or anyone in that world. Because there's a basic asymmetry, which is very hard to overcome. It's so much easier to make a mess than to clean it up. It's so much easier to light several small fires than to put them out. It's like a 10-to-1 advantage. To put it that way, it sounds like my concern is not losing a debate, and that's absolutely not my concern. If you're going to view this as a debate, it's won almost immediately. But I worry about what people take from the encounter, and I just don't want to do additional harm to our public conversation about what is in fact an important public health concern and a growing political one. First, the asymmetry. The reason why there's such an asymmetry here is that it is just impossible to debunk most things in real time. And even if the point being made is in fact spurious, it won't seem spurious to 99% of an audience.
Yeah, and if you don't have like every single obscure random fact at your fingertips, and somebody will bring up some shit that like, oh well, like, I don't know, and then it looks like you've lost the debate. The other person is like this huge high ground that they can stand on.
Right.
Pretty disgusting that Sam Harris here is literally meme jacking my take with no credit, but glad to see that he's an adamant DGGer.
Point being made is in fact
or an ardent DGGer, I should say.
Spurious. It won't seem spurious to 99% of an audience, right? So the person on the conspiracy theory side of things can say, well, what about the 14 CDC officials who resigned last week and wouldn't give reasons when asked? What do you make of that? Right now, there's probably nothing to be made of that, right? I didn't even hear about it. And the truth is I just made that up. But when delivered in the context of a, quote, debate about these things, with someone whose whole angle is there's conspiracy everywhere, it can seem like, oh, you didn't know about that. Well, that's clearly a problem. You should look into that. What about the paper that just came out of Micronesia that showed ivermectin was 100% effective? I didn't see that paper out of Micronesia. Oh, you didn't? Well, okay, you should really do your homework.
Yeah,
it's possible to
yeah,
just
every time
scatter a lot of dust in the eyes and ears of the audience and make it seem like there's
The problem is that, honestly, Harris shouldn't even be saying this. He shouldn't be saying anything. Because to the people that are on the other side, all they're hearing is, ha, he's scared. Debate dodger. He's dodging. He knows that he's wrong. He can't even argue against basic fact. He knows that he's wrong. Listen to these excuses making. Oh, you think that every study that doesn't agree with you is fake? Oh, you think that every study supported by big pharma and big government and big hospital and big tech is fake? Okay, Sam. Good to see you're the one being intellectually honest here. Time to go back to the Dark Horse podcast.
so many, scatter a lot of dust in the eyes and ears of the audience and make it seem like there's so many anomalies out there. There's so many things that need to be explained. And if you're not going to explain those things, if you're not going to connect this particular pattern of dots, well, then you're just not doing the work. And that need not necessarily be done in bad faith. Of course, it can be, right? It gets a tactic. But that's not what I'm alleging Bret and Heather would do. I'm just saying that's the way they think now. It's such a scattershot approach to this. There's so little quality control around the kind of information they're putting forward. And it takes such an effort to chase it all down and debunk it. And anything that shows up that's new in the conversation can't be tracked down in real time. So I don't have much hope that a conversation would wind up producing a document that would be good for the world. The truth is, I'm not the best person to have the conversation either. It would be good to have an immunologist or a virologist or someone who's much closer to this type of research who could really get into the weeds with them more. And the truth is, they're obviously the wrong people to be doing what they're doing, and it shows. But that's not obvious to their audience. It apparently is not obvious to them. So I would welcome an encounter between them and somebody who's truly professionally qualified to talk about all the details. And perhaps that will happen. I mean, in fact, I just reached out to Joe Rogan, telling him what I thought of his latest podcast with Bret and Heather, and recommended that he figure out how to unring that bell. And maybe he will bring Bret and Heather on with someone like Eric Topol or someone even closer to the topic at hand. And that could be useful, but even then, I think that in front of Rogan's audience, it's questionable whether that will actually work for the reasons already given. It's just so easy to be misleading. And again, I'm not suggesting bad faith on their part. I think they probably really believe everything they're saying. But there is just an asymmetry here in how difficult it is to close every loophole to conspiracy and the influx of the incredible as they get opened in the conversation. I'll give you one example of the kind of thing I found implausible in Bret and Heather's last appearance with Joe Rogan. And it's the kind of thing that they too should find implausible, that the moment these words escape their mouths.
Oh no.
And it's still mysterious to me why this isn't happening. But for instance, they were talking about the evolutionary logic of immune escape, right? So we get vaccines, and the moment tens of millions of people start getting vaccinated, that begins to select for variants that can evade the vaccine, right? So it's a fool's errand to be thinking that you're going to get out of this pandemic by vaccinating everyone, because you're just going to create more transmissible and
yeah, but that would happen with natural immunity anyway, right?
Possibly even more dangerous variants. Now, there's a lot wrong with this.
Not to mention, wait, what about like polio and smallpox and other diseases that have been like almost eliminated or eradicated in large part due to vaccines? Like, was that a mistake? Like,
public health point of view and from an evolutionary point of view, right? I mean, from an evolutionary point of view, it's just half the story, right? Yes, the immunity conferred through vaccination can select for variants that can defeat the vaccine, but the immunity conferred by having caught COVID and recovered also selects for variants that can escape that immunity. Right?
And your likelihood of getting sick or getting infected is lower with the vaccine, so it's a self-defeating argument, right?
Vaccination is on all fours with natural immunity there. Think of how worried we need to be about a variant that can defeat natural immunity. Also, that's an argument against all vaccination.
Yeah.
Right? Because
no
vaccines.
Fuck! Oh, shit, pre-watched. Oh, shit, I'm sorry. I pre-watched it. I pre-watched it. I pre-watched this into the future.
To my knowledge, are 100% effective, right? Regardless of exposure, regardless of possible genetic changes in a virus, right? And I believe that the mRNA vaccines for COVID are among the most effective vaccines we have. We're just in the middle of a pandemic, which is an extreme circumstance. I'm not quite sure how our measles vaccines would be performing if we were in the middle of a measles pandemic. If everywhere you went, you were confronted by somebody who had measles. I don't know how often measles mutates, but I think we'd probably find that there's some breakthrough infection. So if you follow his argument, you seem to land in a true anti-vax position.
Yep.
Right? Don't vaccinate against anything because you're selecting for dangerous variants.
Yep.
And again, ignoring the fact that natural immunity is also doing that. And it's curious that Bret and Heather...
If you wanted to be, someone in chat said this, if you wanted to be ultra fucking charitable, you could argue that because the mRNA vaccines only use that spike protein, that maybe it's easier to evolve around the mRNA vaccines than the entire virus because the immunity is different. But I mean, the argument still more or less works. You can, even if you have natural immunity to a virus, it can mutate sufficiently enough that it's different, right? Happens with things all the time like influenza or the cold or whatever, right?
We're not seeing that because again, they run everything through the logic of evolution. There's another glaring error here.
I will say one thing you have to be really, really careful. Now, I'm not writing these off completely, but anytime you argue with somebody and they bring up either neuroscience or evolutionary anything, you're more often than not, you're about to get a huge load of bullshit. You have to be very, very, very careful when either of those two words are uttered, okay? Neuroscience or evolutionarily speaking, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. You have to be really careful because these are like, they're like wagons for garbage dog shit takes that aren't even falsifiable, okay? They will just wagon in the most dog shit takes ever under the guise of evolutionary XYZ, and they're just so stories that you can't even say that they're wrong, right? Like, women develop breasts to fight off like rapists, and that's why that's why women can smack them in the face, and why like you can make up any story you want, and it's like, that's not true. And it's like, yeah, actually it is. That's how, like, why else would some breasts be bigger than others but to fight? And it's like, I don't know. I can't even tell you the argument isn't wrong because I don't even know how to respond to it, right? That every single evolutionary X take is some variation of like a just so story where you're taking a whole set of facts and you're trying to develop a story for why they are the way that they are, but you never really truly know that, right? You don't really truly know why anything developed the way that it did. You don't really truly know why something evolved the way that it did. It's incredibly arrogant to say it happened because of this. It could be a byproduct of some other trait that was selected for. It could have happened just through fucking genetic drift and something appeared. It could actually be like detrimental, but it was like a necessary thing because of some other, like there's like a million different reasons for why things can evolve the way that they did. Yeah, especially when people try to use evolutionary XYZ to explain some complex social interaction. It's like, I don't know if you can say that. Like, let's stick to more data-driven arguments because this is kind of some meme shit.
Just that our current problem with variants has anything to do with vaccination seems a little bonkers because the biggest problem, the Delta variant, emerged in India and became prevalent there under conditions where exactly no one was vaccinated.
True.
We know that the emergence of Delta has nothing to do with our vaccination regime. the whole thrust of their comments there is confused, right? And once again, the subtext to everything they're saying, no matter how reasonable and attentive to caveats they can seem, and I will grant you, they can seem incredibly reasonable. They do not seem like Alex Jones. And this is why what they're doing is so insidious. But the basic message, the basic implication of everything they say, and the apparent reason behind everything they're saying, is the belief that these COVID vaccines are dangerous, and you should be worried about them. You should be profoundly hesitant to take...
Wait, hold on. Apparently there's a Twitter called Evo Psych Googling. Cunning linguists may be a way to taste or smell rival semen. Although there is no empirical work on this, there is evidence that men who are at greater risk of infidelity and sperm competition report spending more time performing cunnilingus. Engaging in cunnilingus can also be used to manipulate one's partner. For example, both men... Oh, and then it cuts off. Conclusion. Cunnilingus can be a tool to facilitate satisfaction within the relationship and can be a tool to combat sperm competition and retain one's partner. Future research should examine how women manipulate men into performing cunnilingus and how engaging in cunnilingus similarly benefits non-heterosexual couples. Is this actually published? Or is this just like a... But, okay.
Take them. These are not normal vaccines. And in fact, the pushing of these vaccines on the public is colossally unethical. That is what they are messaging, right? They've said as much explicitly on their own podcast. I think Bret called it the greatest crime of the century or something insane like that. I should get the actual language, right? Hold on. Okay, now I've taken a few minutes and found the transcript of Bret's confabulation on this topic. He's talking about the absolute scandal of the suppression of the life-saving knowledge of ivermectin and the pushing of the vaccines on his own podcast where he's talking to a Dr. Corey.
Who is that? Wait. Oh, Dr. Corey, the one guy. This isn't the first time that Corey and his colleagues at FLCCC have been accused of making unsubstantiated claims about ivermectin. In December, Corey gave a statement at a U.S. Senate hearing on COVID-19 treatments in which he called ivermectin effectively a miracle drug that could obliterate disease transmission and prevent illness, claims that the Associated Press fact-checkers labeled false at the time. We should probably read this. Corey, who formerly oversaw critical care at the UW Health in Wisconsin, tells the scientists that he now regrets using miracle and other hyperbolic terminology. Based on the evidence Crypto News has collected, we believe the majority of the introduction section of the pro-ivermectin El Ghazar et al. 2020 studies plagiarized. Some paragraphs appear to have been run through a thesaurus. On occasions where an accurate citation is offered, the authors do not make it clear that the preceding sentence was a verbatim/near verbatim quote. The most telling example of this of the thesaurus technique is the line when the authors accidentally change severe acute respiratory syndrome to extreme intense respiratory syndrome. What? So severe acute secure acute respiratory syndrome is SARS. The virus is called SARS-CoV-2. So if you don't know where the name comes from, SARS, severe, meaning it's a severe disease. Acute, meaning it's short. It's not a long-term disease. It's a short disease. Respiratory syndrome, meaning it affects the respiration system. CoV stands for coronavirus. And then 2, it's the second coronavirus that's been identified or whatever, right? But they used a thesaurus. So instead of saying severe acute respiratory syndrome, so SARS, they changed it to extreme intense respiratory syndrome. The chances of any one of these duplications occurring by chance, let alone all of them, are astronomical. The DREAM study. It is also unlikely that these repetitions of data are due to an innocent copy and paste error when rearranging records in the file, as some columns contain identical patterns of data with minor adjustments to 1 or 2 numbers, possibly to make the fabrication less obvious. Copy my homework, but don't make it obvious. Brown also discovered that many other numbers between the original data and the paper do not match. In some cases, numbers were off by only a couple percent, while in others, the numbers were off by over 10%. I can't believe this paper. I don't understand how... One of the studies that Corey cited that I don't know if this was the one that turned out to be just fabricated or if it was a different one. There was one study that came out of was it Indonesia? But it was something where ivermectin had a 100% prophylactic success rate. 100% efficacy rate. You don't see something like really? Every single one, really 100%? Doesn't seem like a little bit, maybe too good. What? You don't even stop for a second? Okay.
The podcast itself is titled The Crime of the Century. And they're going back and forth about how nefarious the machinations must be to have produced this policy. Dr. Corey says all the pipeline molecules, the stuff that's coming that they want to bring to market, are also there, right? And then Bret says, which have had a tremendous investment made in them. The thing I think we're almost certain to get wrong is that as outsiders, we have no idea what these conversations sound like on the inside. There's a temptation to imagine that people are somehow sitting around comfortable with the fact that their behavior is going to cause hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of deaths, that it may stick humanity with a relationship with a pathogen that it will not be able to shake because it will prevent us from taking the appropriate action until it's too late. We imagine that people are saying these things out loud, when I'm sure that there are some sociopaths in the system who are probably capable of having those discussions, but there aren't enough sociopaths to account for this behavior. There is some way that people who are doing a harm great enough, I've called it the crime of the century, and I realize the century is young, but this is going to be hard to top. It's going to be hard to top. There's some way that people who are engaged in something worthy of acclaim, like the crime of the century, are comfortable with what they're doing, or worse, are convinced it's the right thing, that somehow the greater good is being served. Okay, I mean, here you have it in fairly crystalline form, the conspiratorial thinking, the outrageous claims about death and destruction due to these vaccines, and the suppression of ivermectin for purely mercenary reasons. The problem, of course, is that there's no reason to think this is true, right? There is no reason to think that ivermectin is a surrogate for getting vaccinated. And there's no reason to think that people should be terrified of getting these vaccines. And that is the message that Bret is spreading hour by hour by hour. Whereas the truth is, we have a head-to-head comparison between...
Here's a question. Even Joe Rogan did this, okay? Why the fuck is it that everybody that is... Or I shouldn't generalize, because I've only heard Rogan do this. Why is it that some people are afraid of the vaccine, and they say this is bullshit, it was rushed, emergency use authorization, this is bullshit. But then they'll take the monoclonal antibodies, which are also an EUA from the FDA. Like, why are the monoclonal antibodies safe, but not the vaccine? Like, curious how that works, you know? But whatever. Maybe Joe Rogan is just really scared of needles. Maybe that's what this all comes down to, actually.
3 cohorts of people, tens of millions, hundreds of millions in some cases. Those who have been vaccinated, those who have caught COVID without being vaccinated, those who have caught COVID having been vaccinated. And we know the outcomes. We know them well enough to know that you're far better off being vaccinated and eventually catching COVID, as you will, than catching it without having been vaccinated. Catching COVID is not a strategy for becoming immune to COVID. It's just catching COVID, right? And those who survive will have some natural immunity. The jury's no longer out on that score. Now, it may be true that in certain populations, it is rational to worry that the potential side effects of vaccination are greater than the risk of COVID. For instance, I believe there are some data about teenage boys having a higher risk of myocarditis than teenage girls, certainly. I think it's a 10-fold difference. And the risk may be high enough that it is in fact greater than their risk of becoming severely ill with COVID. The data I saw suggested it was kind of a coin toss there, but slightly in favor of not getting vaccinated. If those data hold up, well then yes, it may be rational to decide that 12-year-old boys shouldn't be vaccinated. But the general picture here is fairly well established. We know catching COVID is worse in almost every case that has thus far been tried than getting vaccinated for COVID. And from what I've seen recently, the data in favor of ivermectin seems increasingly dubious. So parsing all this should be left to the professionals, right? Again, I come back to my basic mystification around what Bret and Heather are doing. Why do this publicly? If you're going to make the personal choice not to get vaccinated based on your scrutiny of the data, great, make that choice. But why spend the better part of a year convincing people that they shouldn't get vaccinated? You can say that's not what you're doing, but that is in fact what you're doing.
Yep.
And that's what seems so irresponsible. The U.S. is now one of the least vaccinated countries in the developed world. We got these life-saving vaccines before
first.
Everyone.
What the fuck?
And now we're the 37th most vaccinated country. We're behind the UAE and Portugal and Singapore and Spain and Denmark and
Portugal.
Uruguay, Chile,
Disgusting.
Belgium, Ireland, Canada, Bahrain, the UK, Mongolia. We're behind Mongolia. Norway, Italy, France, the Netherlands, Germany. We're behind Mauritius and Cyprus, but we're also behind Cambodia, Lithuania, Malaysia, the Czech Republic, Greece.
Eastern Europe.
Sense,
Unbelievable.
Right? Because of misinformation and the way it's interacting with our hyper-partisan political landscape. That's why we're here. And there's no question that 3 hours of the Bret and Heather show on Joe Rogan is having an effect. And that'll sound as censorious as it does. I just think it's irresponsible. And I'm not quite sure
Why?
how to grab hold of this increasingly unbalanced object so as to set it right. But perhaps Rogan will do something to unring that bell. Okay, next question.
Oh. Make sure to subscribe to Sam Harrison, guys.